9 years working K9, and I can count on one hand the calls that still wake me up at 3 in the morning. This is one of them. Rex is a 4-year-old German Shepherd. We've been partners since he was 18 months old, and I've trusted that dog with my life more times than I want to think about. He doesn't rattle. I've run him through warehouses where the lights were dead. I've sent him into abandoned houses where the floors could have given out at any step. I've worked him through dense woods in the middle of the night with nothing but a headlamp and a radio. Every time he moves forward, ears up, nose working, totally locked in. That's what made that night so different. Because for the first and only time in our 9 years together, Rex didn't want to go. We got called in to backup patrol on a house search. A foot pursuit had started a few blocks over. Officers tried to stop a male suspect and he bolted, sprinting through backyards until they lost him. Last known direction put him near this property. The side gate was hanging open. The rear door of the house was unlocked. Neighbors had heard what sounded like a struggle in the backyard. Patrol swept the first floor and cleared it, but something felt off to them. They believed the suspect may have forced his way inside and was still hiding somewhere above them. They wanted Rex. We arrived about 20 minutes after the initial call. 2-story house in a quiet subdivision. No damage to the front. Officers briefed me fast. Open gate, unlocked back door, suspect gone like smoke within yards of the property. I gave Rex the search command and he moved immediately, pulling hard on the short leash, sweeping from room to room. Living room, clear. Kitchen, clear. Laundry room, clear. Then we headed upstairs. The upper floor was a narrow hallway with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom feeding off it. No cross breeze, no movement in the air. The owners were out of town, so every window was shut. That kind of stillness has its own weight when you're searching. Rex pulled into the first bedroom. Clear. Second bedroom. Clear. Then he turned toward the bathroom at the end of the hall and I followed. I looked it over. Everything was in place. Nothing disturbed. Rex moved through the small room, sniffing the base of the vanity, working the floor. Then he went completely rigid, ears forward, body locked up like he'd hit a wall made of nothing. Then he started growling. Not at the bathroom, at something in the hallway. I stepped back out of the room with him and he was already staring, body low, hackles fully raised. I looked where he was looking. At the far end of the hallway, right outside the last bedroom door, there was a figure. Tall, dark, completely, unnaturally still. Not one of mine. The officers downstairs would have called up before coming up. I identified myself, announced the K9. No answer. I said plainly, "Who is that?" Nothing. Silence. And then Rex, the dog who has tracked armed men without a single hesitation, started pulling in the opposite direction. He didn't want to go forward. He'd never done that. Not once in 9 years. Then the figure turned and walked into the bedroom. I knew every officer on that scene. I knew their positions. Nobody was upstairs with me. I drew my weapon and radioed that I may have located the suspect at the end bedroom, told them to start making their way up. I moved Rex forward. He fought the whole way. Short, hard pulls backward, glancing up at me like he genuinely couldn't understand why I was making him do this. We reached the doorway and he planted and would not cross. I stepped through alone, weapon up, and the room was empty. Not just clear, empty. A bed, a dresser, closed window, no closet hatch, no crawl space, no panel in the wall that we didn't check twice. When backup reached me, we searched every inch, checked the walls, checked every room again. There was nothing and no one. Rex stayed in the hallway the entire time. Another officer tried to coax him in. He wouldn't move. After 20 minutes, I told them I had to get him out. He kept glancing back at that room as we moved down the stairs. The moment we stepped outside into the night air, something released in him. Not much, but enough that I noticed. When I put him in his crate, he curled right up. But he didn't look at me the way he usually does after a search. That look he gives me, the one that says good. We did good tonight. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times. Part of me still believes it was the suspect. Maybe there was something I missed. But Rex has tracked armed men in the dark without a moment's hesitation. He's entered environments that would make most people walk back to the car. That bedroom was the only place in 9 years he refused to enter. I trust that dog more than I trust my own instincts. Every officer has at least one night call they can't explain. That night was mine. I was 21 years old when I joined the force in a small remote town I won't name. The department needed bodies, and I was a young father who needed a steady paycheck. The math worked out. They put rookies on nights, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the older guys at the station liked to give me grief about it. The crummiest shifts, they'd say, grinning. But I didn't actually mind. I've always been a night person. Most calls were routine, speeders, drunk drivers. I spent a lot of those quiet hours just sitting in the cruiser, listening to podcasts, windows cracked, watching an empty town breathe in the dark. It was almost peaceful. Then something happened that changed the way I looked at every call after it. About a year into the job, a severe thunderstorm moved through town and knocked out power across most of the area. Major roads were flooded. I repositioned my cruiser to a central parking lot downtown to cut down response time when the accident calls started coming in. At 2 a.m., dispatch came over the radio. My dispatcher, Claire, had taken a 911 call from someone she described as an adult male. The caller said he was being held captive inside someone's home. Then the call dropped. When Claire tried to call back, no answer. My cruiser's computer showed the address. I was about 10 minutes out, probably the closest unit. I radioed Claire that I'd respond and requested backup. Another officer, Chris, new like me, came back and said he'd be on scene in 5. Then Claire hesitated. I remember hearing the static filling the silence before she spoke again. She said the caller sounded like he was altering his voice somehow, possibly through a digital filter, making himself sound like a child. Her exact words were like a young girl. She advised all responding units to proceed with extreme caution. I radioed back in code and drove out. When I turned into the neighborhood, every streetlight was dead. The entire block had lost power. Low visibility. Whoever was inside the house we were approaching would have the advantage of darkness we did not share. I followed the GPS to the end of the street and saw Chris's cruiser already idling out front. I pulled alongside him and rolled my window down. He made a comment about the condition of the house, and I took a moment to look at it properly. The grass was knee-high. Overgrown bushes swallowed the lower windows whole. The roof was concave in sections, shingles missing across the entire surface. It looked abandoned, but the lights inside were on. Somebody was home. I've learned over the years that the state of a person's living space tells you something about the state of their thinking. Whatever was happening inside this house had been going on for a long time. I told Chris I'd take lead. We stepped out into the downpour, opened our umbrellas against it, and followed the waterlogged path up to the front door. Chris clicked on his flashlight. When you're working a call like this, your backup's job is to watch the suspect's body language so you don't have to. You focus on their words. Chris was calm under pressure, observant without being obvious. Perfect for this. He handled what was behind me so I could focus on what was in front of me. I rang the bell. We stood there and listened. A few seconds passed, then footsteps moved toward the door from inside and stopped. Whoever was on the other side was standing perfectly still, just waiting. My eyes drifted slowly to the peephole, and the moment they landed on it, a dark, distorted shape pulled back from the other side. Someone had been watching us. I identified us and asked them to open up. Another pause. Then the lock clicked, and the door opened just enough to reveal a man standing in the gap. Early 30s. Heavy, balding, thick glasses. He looked at us the way people look at something they were hoping wouldn't come. I told him we'd received a 911 call from this address, a male voice claiming to be held captive inside a home. He looked confused, said it must have been a pocket dial. I asked him calmly, if it was a pocket dial, how did he explain the content of the call? Just for a fraction of a second, his eyes moved to the side. Then he said he didn't know anything about a voice. I asked if anyone else was in the house. He said he lived alone. I told him we needed to step inside and take a look for safety reasons. Not without a warrant, he said. A warrant can come fast when someone's life might be at risk. I walked back to my cruiser, got Claire on the radio, and requested a telephonic warrant from the on-call magistrate. 5 minutes later, she came back. Judge approved it. She emailed it directly to my in-car system. I walked the document back to the man. His hands were visibly shaking when he reached for it. He pulled the door open and stepped aside. The smell hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. Rotting food. Something else underneath it I couldn't name. I swept my light across the interior. Hallway ahead, a room to the right. I shined my beam into the room. It was the living space. Clothes piled in drifts across the carpet, stacks of dishes, food caked on them, cockroaches moving over the surface of everything. A couch that looked pulled from someone's trash listing against the far wall. I've worked enough drug cases to recognize this kind of environment. I made a mental note to check for paraphernalia once the immediate safety sweep was done. I turned back toward the hallway and my boot struck something on the floor. I looked down. In my flashlight beam was a pink Barbie doll playhouse. I'd seen it before. Not here. I'd bought this exact set for my own daughter the previous Christmas. I asked him if he had kids. He said no, but explained that his nieces sometimes visited, so he kept a few toys around. Chris and I looked at each other. No mother alive would let a child spend a single hour inside this house. I told the man this was his last opportunity to tell me if anyone else was inside. He insisted he lived alone. I started down the hallway. He tried to follow. Chris caught him by the arm and told him to stay put. The hallway had a room on each side and a closed door at the end. I cleared the first room from the doorway and stopped. Children's toys everywhere, diapers on the floor. And in the corner, hunched over in a rocking chair, a dark, human-shaped silhouette. I drew my weapon. Then I realized what I was looking at. A doll. A massive doll, every bit as large as a grown adult, dressed in women's clothing. On the bed beside it, women's blouses, jeans, lingerie, all folded with obsessive care, each pile separated by color. In a house that looked like it was decomposing from the inside, this one room had been tended to. Deliberately. Carefully. Chris asked me what I had. I told him all clear, but I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to. I didn't know what this was telling me, but I knew it was telling me something. The second bedroom off the hallway was empty. I moved toward the door at the very end. From behind me, the man asked if I wanted to see upstairs instead. I told him yes, but basement first. He said there was nothing down there. Chris's voice came back firm behind him, telling the man to stand still, which meant he was trying to edge forward, trying to stop me. The closer I got to that door, the louder his protests became. I grabbed the handle and pushed it open. Wooden stairs disappeared into absolute darkness below. The kind of dark that swallows a flashlight beam and barely gives it back. From somewhere deep in that basement, out past where my light could reach, something rattled. I told Chris I had movement. The man behind him started apologizing, over and over. I'm sorry, please, I'm sorry. I went down. Each step announced itself under my weight, the wood groaning in the silence. The rattling grew louder the lower I went. I reached the landing and swept my beam across stacked boxes, old furniture pushed against every wall. At the far end of the room there was another door. The noise was coming from behind it. I drew my weapon, identified myself, and commanded whoever was inside to come out slowly with their hands visible. The noise stopped cold. I gave the command again. Nothing moved. I crossed the room, sliding between boxes, keeping my weapon on the door. When I reached it, I positioned myself to the side of the frame, reached across, grabbed the handle, and pulled it open. I stood flat against the wall. Whatever was on the other side of that door, if it was armed, if it fired, I needed the frame between me and it. Several seconds passed that felt like several minutes. Nothing came out. I said a quick prayer, then I looked. I won't describe exactly what I saw in that room. Some things you protect people from. But here's what happened. A man in his mid-40s was being held captive in that basement. A father of 3. Someone the community had grieved and quietly accepted as gone. He'd been missing for 2 years. For 2 years, his family had been living with a silence where he used to be. Earlier that same night, before we arrived, the homeowner had brought the man his dinner and made one careless mistake. He left his phone behind. In the dark, with whatever limited movement he had, the captive managed to activate Siri and dial 911. By the time we arrived, he'd been confined in a way that prevented him from calling out or making any substantial noise. When I commanded him to come out and he froze, it wasn't defiance. He was terrified that if I couldn't see him clearly, I might mistake him for a threat and pull the trigger. We arrested the homeowner on the scene. The victim was transported immediately. His family was called. I don't let myself think too often about what would have happened if Claire had dismissed that call, or if I hadn't pushed through that final door. But the detail that has never let me sleep easily since is this. When that man called 911 from the darkness of that basement, he spoke in a voice Claire described as a child's, like a young girl. The only explanation that has ever made sense to me is that over 2 years of captivity, he had been forced to speak that way for so long that when he finally got the chance to call for help, that fragile, altered voice was the only one he had left. And if he was forced to do that, I don't let my mind go much further. Some rooms are better left closed. 8 years on patrol and counting, mostly nights. After enough time, you think you've seen everything at least once. Domestic calls, drunk drivers, break-ins, overdoses. After a while, the calls blur together into a kind of procedural rhythm. You show up, you separate people, you take the report. Sometimes you make an arrest and then you move on to the next one. But there are a handful of calls that never blurred. This one happened a few years back, late October, just before 3 in the morning. Dispatch put me out for a 911 hang-up. A neighbor had called in reporting she could hear a woman screaming from the house next door. By the time she got through to dispatch, the screaming had already stopped, but she was certain about what she'd heard. I was 5 minutes out. When I pulled up, the street was dead quiet. Most houses were dark. A light rain had started to fall, just enough to make the asphalt glow under the streetlights. The house was 2 stories with a small porch out front. No lights visible from the street. I parked a few houses down and approached on foot. As I got closer, I noticed the front door was slightly open. Not damaged, just open. That single detail turned everything from a possible false alarm into something real. I radioed dispatch that I was on scene with an open door and requested a backup unit. Nearest officer was 10 minutes out at minimum. I stepped onto the porch and listened. Rain on the ground, nothing else. I knocked on the doorframe and announced myself. No response. I knocked harder. With a report of screaming and an open door, I had what I needed to go in. I pushed the door slowly and stepped inside. Nothing wrong on the surface. No smell, no forced entry, no obvious disorder. The living room ahead of me looked clean and ordinary. I swept it first behind the couch, in the corners, then moved toward the kitchen. My flashlight bounced across clean countertops, a sink full of dishes soaking, and a glass on the kitchen table that still had water in it. That glass stayed with me. Someone had been sitting at that table recently, not hours ago. Recently. I called out again, identified myself, told anyone inside to make themselves known. My own voice sounded wrong in the silence. I almost never get rattled on late calls, but something about this house was already getting under my skin. I waited for an answer from upstairs. None came. I moved down the hall toward the back. Small bathroom on the right, clear. Guest bedroom on the left, clear. At the end of the hallway, a staircase going up. I stepped onto the first stair and heard it. A faint shuffle from above. One soft drag of something across carpet. I stopped, drew my weapon, and went up. At the top, 3 doors. 2 closed, one slightly open at the far end of the hall. I announced myself again as I reached the landing, told whoever was inside to show their hands. Silence. I approached the open door and pushed it wider. Larger bedroom. Bed unmade, sheets half off the mattress, hanging toward the floor. A lamp on the nightstand was knocked over on its side. That was the first thing that was wrong. I checked the closet. Empty. Checked under the bed. Nothing. Window closed and locked. No way in or out of that room that I could find. The second bedroom was a child's room. Toys on the floor, small dresser, posters on the walls. Empty. I moved toward the last door, the bathroom, and almost didn't look down. But I did. On the carpet just outside the door, there was a dark spot. I crouched and touched it with my gloved hand. Wet. Blood. Not a catastrophic amount, but enough to have pooled. My heart rate climbed in a way I don't like to admit happened. I radioed it in and asked dispatch to get back up moving faster. I pushed the bathroom door open with my elbow and flicked the light on the same way. The shower curtain was closed. On the tile floor, dark streaks ran toward the tub. I yanked the curtain back. The tub was empty, but there was more blood near the drain. The pattern looked like someone had stood over it, bleeding steadily, and then walked away. I checked every corner of that bathroom. No one. Backup was still minutes out. I was alone in that house with fresh blood and no body. I did another pass of the upstairs, slower this time, checking every corner I'd moved past quickly before. That's when I heard a sound from below. The unmistakable give of a floorboard bending under weight. I moved back to the stairs, aimed my light down into the dark living room. I couldn't see movement, but I felt something. That specific feeling you learn to recognize after enough years on the job. The feeling of being watched from somewhere you can't pinpoint. I went down, cleared the living room again, the kitchen again, and then I noticed something I had walked straight past the first time. A door near the refrigerator. I'd registered it as a pantry. It was now slightly open. I was almost certain it had been closed before. I pulled it open the rest of the way. Not a pantry. A narrow staircase descending into a basement. I hit the light switch at the top. Nothing happened. Either the bulb was gone, or power had been cut down there. Complete darkness below. I radioed that I was going into the basement and started down. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floors, exposed ceiling beams, cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. As I stepped off the last stair, my light found the center of the room, and I stopped. A metal folding chair sat in the open space. Beneath it, a large dark pool of blood, bigger than what I'd seen upstairs. On the armrests of the chair, zip ties, cut. I held still for a moment, taking it in, running through what I was looking at. Then movement hit the edge of my light beam, a figure in the far corner, breaking hard toward the back wall, disappearing behind a stack of boxes. I yelled for them to stop and moved fast after them, but they were quicker, cutting toward the back of the basement where a small window sat near the ceiling. I heard the glass give. By the time I reached the corner, the window was broken out, and whoever had been in that room was gone. Outside, into the rain. I climbed through that window after them, opening my hand on the broken glass in the process. Outside, it was still raining. I could see a shape sprinting toward the alley at the far end of the block. I ran. I lost them when they turned the corner. Backup arrived minutes later. We set up a perimeter. K9 was called. Detectives responded. We never found the person who ran. The house belonged to a man who lived alone. He wasn't there. His wallet was upstairs. His phone was on the kitchen counter. The evidence in that basement told a story nobody who looked at it could explain away. The blood matched the homeowner. There was a lot of it. Not enough to confirm he died in that room, but enough. He was never found. The neighbor who called 911 told investigators she heard a woman screaming. We never connected a woman to that address. No evidence anyone else had ever lived there. I don't know if I walked into something that was still in progress or if I got there after it was already over. If whoever was in that basement hadn't made one mistake, knocking over a stack of boxes in the dark, I might have walked through that house and written it up as a false alarm. The missing man's case is still open. Every now and then, on patrol, I drive down that street. A new family lives there now. I see kids' bikes in the driveway sometimes. I keep driving. You show up, you take the report, you move on. That's the job. But some calls follow you home, and this one never really left.